In The Wire, we follow the drug trade of Baltimore, Maryland, and all the factors that facilitate its growth and boom. Whilst initially the show is centered on the street trade itself and the cops investigating the drug industry, subsequent seasons expand on elements of the city that fuel the repeating cycles of the underworld, from the broken schooling system to the bureaucratic city hall. Once the show is over, we're left with a far more enlightened outlook on why the war on drugs does not work. One of the most fascinating elements of the show is observing the mechanisms of the drug trade itself, how it works, what the roles are, the structures and hierarchies in place. We learn about hoppers, muscle, corners, wholesalers, kingpins, and how they all work together. Perhaps the most despised individual possible in the world of the drug trade is the snitch, the turncoat, the rat, a guy who squeals to the authorities to save his own skin, maybe pressured with a heavy sentence during questioning, maybe approaching a cop to win a favor, maybe singing like a canary in prison to avoid harm. The snitch is universally despised in the underworld, and it's a concept explored extensively in gangster movies and shows. In The Godfather Part 2, for example, Frank Pentangeli testifies in court after thinking that his boss Michael Corleone tried to have him killed. In Goodfellas, a paranoid Henry Hill rats on his friends to save his skin. In The Sopranos, rats are the most detested of creatures, with Tony Soprano even going out of his way to track one down and kill one he spotted when he's out on a trip with his daughter. In fact, a huge number of mobsters in The Sopranos turn out to be informants, highlighting the crumbling nature of the code of omerta. In the underworld, the law, the authority, the cops, the ones who make and enforce the rules and parameters, are the ultimate enemy. It's for this reason that, say, Hector Salamanca in Breaking Bad refuses to snitch on Walter in spite of hating the man, going as far as to shit himself in the police station just to stick it to the cops. Snitching is essentially going against the laws established in the underworld. That's not how you play the game, as Avon says in one scene. It's considered dirty, cowardly, and below the belt, akin to treachery against your brother in arms, undermining the loyalty that is central to the ethos of the mob. Of course, there are tangible reasons for the higher-ups in the underworld to push and propagate the idea that rats are the lowest of the low. A code of silence is essential for a criminal conspiracy to function. Once people start talking to the cops, the people at the top can end up being arrested and the entire entity can collapse. It's why we see characters, usually at the bottom of the food chain, like Bodhi, so gung-ho about the code of the streets, because it would have been drilled into him from a young age by the already established figures like Stringer, who are far more removed from actual criminal activity and therefore risk. Essentially, the fear of being labelled as a snitch, the loss of respect, position, and possible fatal consequences that comes with it, acts as a deterrent in the game. Anyway, the concept of the snitch is not something we are looking to discuss today, though there is a conversation to be had there, with some people thinking a snitch is only someone who gives up his own people, others feeling any information provided to the cops is snitching. I wanted to take a closer look at the snitches in The Wire, a little analysis on the different characters who ratted on each other. It's a surprisingly long list, and I think there's a lot of surprising elements to the snitches in the show. I would go as far as to say that, in the right circumstances, all the gangsters in The Wire would snitch, in spite of whatever their reputation is. It's easy for the toughest gangster to flaunt their codes and ethics about, but when push comes to shove, they may fold under questioning. When the chips are down, omerta often goes out of the window to save their own skin. There were also rats and informants in the police department. Kima reveals that McNulty was staging the serial killings in Season 5. Jay Landsman leaks internal department information to City Hall. Carver was giving information on the Major Crimes Unit to Burrell. But in this video, we're going to focus on the streets, not the cops nor civilian witnesses. Omar is a really interesting character. Is he a snitch? Well, he's pretty much openly a snitch, seeing as though he tells McNulty and Greggs that Bird is the man who killed William Gant, and he then testifies in court, sending Bird to prison. He even wears a wire in one scene when he's meeting Stringer Bell. What makes it even worse is that Bird didn't even kill Gant, so really the wrong man was sent to prison. Now, you could make the argument that Omar is a wild card. He doesn't follow the rules of the game, instead living by his own code. He's a man who rips and runs. He robs drug dealers. They're all fair game to him. He'll make a deal with Prop Joe, then steal his shipment, and then sell it back to him. That's just the way he is. He's a maverick who the rules of the game don't apply to. Now, I agree in spirit, but I gotta counsel. There's one scene that derails this argument. When he meets with McNulty and Greggs in the graveyard, he specifically mentions that he won't snitch because that's not how he thinks the game is played. He is against it. So isn't he a hypocrite for implicating Bird? Well, Omar specifically mentions that he himself never puts a hand on a civilian. Bird be trifling by killing a civilian, a regular tax-paying flag-saluting motherfucker, which was also outside of the rules of the game. So Omar does likewise. He probably doesn't even see it as snitching, and it's also implied the cops know Omar is lying about witnessing the murder, so they also cheat by going along with this and having Bird arrested. Omar, the cops, and the Barksdales, they're all as dirty as each other in this storyline. Shit. Also, after Brandon is later murdered, he's devastated and then becomes open to the idea of further punishing the Barksdales, whatever it takes. Sure, I get it, he was hurt, but he presents himself as a man with principles, and he breaks those principles when he decides to testify. It's not as if he never had a problem with snitching, he refused to do it, and then he does it anyway. A man must have a code? I guess not when the occasion calls for it. However, I think you can offer yet another counter-argument. One said as much when Omar later meets Stringer. He acknowledges that killing Brandon was part of the game. What he took umbrage to was the way Brandon was excessively tortured and left for display. He considered that as having strayed out of the boundaries of the game, and he reciprocated by targeting Barksdale's stashes, and perhaps this was also a reason why he decided to testify in court against Bird. Let's not forget, there's a big difference between Omar telling Jimmy and Kima in Season 1 that Bird killed Gant, and him actually testifying in open court in Season 2. He may have never actually gone as far as to take the stand if Brandon hadn't been tortured. Similarly, later in the show, when Omar is on his rampage against Marlowe, he tells some cops that Marlowe's crew have weapons on them, so when the cops roll in, Omar steals their stash. He definitely utilizes talking to the cops when it benefits him, but again, you can still make the argument that Omar considered Marlowe going below the belt by having Butchie killed, so he thought, fuck it, I'm not playing by the rules on this one. I guess it ultimately shows that the idea of snitching is arbitrary. Pretty much anyone who does it will feel like he has some kind of justification, like Bodhi in Season 4. What do you think? Should Omar count as a snitch? Let me know in the comments section below. Now I know what you're thinking about this video. Where's Wallace at? Where the fuck is Wallace? This, of course, is a clear-cut case of snitching. He was speaking to the likes of Daniels and McNulty, but the Barksdales got to him before he could do some actual damage. Interestingly, Stringer and Avon didn't even know that Wallace was actually actively going to start singing. The mere threat of Wallace cracking was enough for Stringer to give Bodhi the order. Now, Wallace was in the game, and he started snitching. Technically, he got what was coming to him. That's the game. Once you're in it, you're in it. But I'm astounded at some of the comments I read regarding Wallace. Randy too. I mean, the guy was 16 years old, just a kid. It's very easy to say that he shouldn't have snitched, but we have to acknowledge we're talking about a child who was honourably looking after other kids, I might add. Not just a child, but one who's not yet contaminated by the game. He hadn't yet lost his soul. He was just unfortunate to grow up in the wrong environment. There was even talk between him and D'Angelo of him leaving the game and going back to school. But one of the key elements of The Wire is that these guys do not know any other kind of life. This was all the kid knew. As he says, this is me right here. And he never fully grasped what kind of danger he was in. Wallace still had a childlike, playful innocence about him, and whilst he made an idiotic decision to come back to Baltimore and was a snitch by the rules of the game, and his testimony would have done damage, his death was cruel and disturbing. Also, there's levels to the game. Wallace is down at the pit on money exchange duties. He's not muscle, he's not a hitter. It's easy to say he wasn't cut out for the game, but that's not true, because had he only continued doing his low-level job, he might have been alright. And it's unfair for us to expect him to be used to extreme violence just because he's in the drug industry. If Brandon's crippled body could make Omar drop his code, why shouldn't it have an effect on Wallace, a naive, optimistic child who can't shake from his conscience that he played a part in this unhinged torture? And if Omar can leave the safety of sandy beaches and make an emotional decision to come back to Baltimore, why can't Wallace? I have similar sentiments to Randy. Yeah, I get it, he snitched. According to the rules of the game, he could be taken out. Marlowe chooses instead to have it put out there that he's a snitch. But come on guys, he was a kid. Have some mercy. Randy was dealt a terrible hand. He was the smartest and brightest of the kids, and he got one of the worst fates. And he should never have been put in that position by little Kevin, who instead of doing the job he was given, defers it to Randy. Randy, at least according to my estimation, isn't even part of the game. Yeah, I know the game is more than just the drug trade, and it's the very culture these guys live in. But the closest Randy got to the drug trade was selling candy to Lex, which I guess might be a reason why Marlowe spares his life, or at least in the man's own words, Randy can't hurt them. You know, when I first watched The Wire, it hadn't even occurred to me that Randy snitched. I was just immersed into this subplot of this poor kid who panicked and said whatever he needed to say to avoid having his foster mother called and him potentially getting sent back to the group home, which was his ultimate fear and unfortunately his eventual fate. To think that his life spiraled out of control, his foster mother getting burnt, whatever happened there, all from that one scene with Mrs. Donnelly is deeply sad. And like Wallace, Randy was troubled by his involvement in a murder. His case is even more sympathetic than Wallace's, I feel. And he didn't even squeal to the cops. Herc pushed him to the point of verbal abuse and Randy stood as firm as he did. And the bathroom rape allegations were dropped and Randy was back at school. But by then, Herc had implied to little Kevin that Randy was talking and that was enough for the streets. The damage was done. There's a few interesting nuggets regarding this storyline. For example, did you notice that when Randy is first in trouble with Donnelly, Cutty is in the office giving Randy a knowing look, and when Randy folds, Cutty shakes his head in disappointment. Also, I think a lot of Wire fans, myself included, have made a mistake regarding little Kevin. I think a lot of people assume he was killed by Marlowe because he was picked up by the cops, and Bodhi advises him to tell Marlowe about it so he doesn't get suspicious, but Marlowe gets suspicious anyway, so has him killed. A lot of people assume this is because of the Bodhi scene, and that might have played a part, but if you rewatch the scene where little Kevin speaks to Marlowe, it's evident that little Kevin is actually killed for not following orders, for getting Randy involved and not telling Lex himself about the meeting. You were supposed to do that, as Chris says, and when little Kevin says he wanted to keep some distance between him and Lex, Chris and Marlowe share a look, and then Marlowe sees through Kevin's lie about telling Randy what happened to Lex. The Stanfields can't afford these kind of leaks, so Kevin is punished for his insubordination. It wasn't actually because they thought he was snitching. A Joe Pesci line from The Irishman comes to mind. When I ask someone to take care of something, I expect them to take care of it themselves. I don't need two roads coming back to me. The Wire is clear in showing us the human element in stories, even when the characters snitch. This is perhaps never better showcased than with Bodhi. He was intrinsically a soldier. The game was all he knew, and yes, he was about to snitch at the end of season 4 to get rid of Marlowe's barbaric kind, something Marlowe correctly deduced and dealt with accordingly. But I'm sure there's nobody who's watched The Wire who didn't have sympathy for Bodhi's position, even though if he went into witness protection or something, he would have ended up forever being known as a rat on the streets. It's telling that a character who is so proud of being part of the game would end up breaking the rules, and yet we can all understand why he did it. In Bodhi's day, there was a semblance of honor, or that's how he would have perceived it anyway, but the Stanfields were indiscriminately killing. You know, we can actually use the death of Wallace and the death of little Kevin as landmarks in the growth of Bodhi Broadus. Bodhi clearly looks up to Stringer. His relationship with String would have been shaped during his adolescence, and when String gives the order on Wallace, Bodhi believed it had to be done without question. The idea of questioning the order never even entered his head, even if the act itself was deeply difficult for him. That's because he trusted Stringer. He was in awe of him. Think to his look of admiration in season 2 when he realizes Stringer was in the know from the beginning about the car and the drugs, or when Stringer tells him to deal with Wallace and he invites Bodhi into the car. Bodhi has a look on his face. It's like he can't believe he's actually sitting here with Stringer Bell. Fast forward to season 4, with his hero and thus his path to career advancement dead, Bodhi now feels old, cold and tired, and he now thinks critically instead of blindly following orders. An order was given against little Kev and it was carried out, but Bodhi now questions and laments the necessity of killing little Kevin, grappling and struggling with the immorality of it all, the pointlessness and cruelty of the violence and killing. It's interesting stuff. Can we call the Kingpin himself, Avon Barksdale, a snitch? Well, I think it's something worth discussing at least. I suppose it depends on your definition of snitching. Avon is in prison and a cruel CO, Tillman, who is dismissive to Avon, smuggles drugs into prison to sell to inmates. Avon has Tillman's supply swapped with hot doses and then offers the authorities a tip for a lighter sentence, implicating Tillman in exchange for a lighter sentence. Putting aside the horrific deaths this caused, does this count as snitching? Some would argue yes. The CO, in a manner of speaking, is in the game. In fact, if I remember correctly, he was being supplied by Butchie. So isn't Avon snitching on another player? Then again, Tillman's a corrections officer, an authority figure, and many would consider implicating someone on the other side, a cop, a lawyer. Implicating someone like that isn't ratting. The guy was dirty, so Avon took advantage. And COs are the enemy anyway. It's all part of the game. But I'm sure if word got out that Avon did what he did, his rivals like Marlowe would want to use it against him to undermine him. Prop Joe would probably appreciate the ingenuity of it, but Barksdale foot soldiers like Bodhi or Poot might have a hard time reconciling with it. After all, today he snitches on a dirty cop to shave a few years, tomorrow he snitches on me and you for a few corners. But in all honesty, they probably wouldn't think about it that deep. They'd just cheer that a Barksdale man got a CO locked up. For me, the bigger question is Avon giving up Stringer. He was between a rock and a hard place, oh no doubt. Stringer is his close ally, but if he doesn't give him up, he'll make an enemy out of Brother Muzone and lose his New York connect. Plus, Stringer's murder of D'Angelo was still fresh in Avon's mind, which would have affected his decision making. Even still, you can see Avon struggling with it, trying to find another way around it. He tries to reason with Brother. So it's not like he willingly sold out Stringer, and I'm not saying it was an easy decision. Plus, Stringer was at fault for playing those away games and getting caught up in a web of deceit. But ultimately, that's what he did. He sold him out. If all the us man and B&B stuff was really what it was all about, then Avon wouldn't have given him up. He would have taken the hit, sacrificed a part of his business for the loyalty of his best friend. But he didn't. He chose business. Now I know Muzone ain't no cop, but doesn't what Avon's done amount to snitching? Even worse than snitching, as he's turning his back on his friend, his best friend. Sure, Stringer set him up to go back into the can, but Avon has set up Stringer to die. Of course, as always, there is the human element to consider, and things aren't that simple. Avon now knows that Stringer doesn't value family loyalty in the same way he does. He could sell him out in the future, which of course he does. And it's either let Stringer go or lose the streets to Marlowe. And without the streets, who is Avon? Just a gangster, I suppose. Now, Stringer's case seems more clear and cut. Sure, he thought long and hard about it, but ultimately, String made the decision to call a cop and have Avon sent to prison. Not just Avon, but what looked like the majority of the Barksdale crew. Of course, Stringer will also have his justification. Avon was ruining the new ways of doing things with his warring. Stringer just wanted him out of the way for a few years until the game evolved. But what he did is the textbook definition of snitching. But still, if we're gonna slag off String for what he did, surely we must do the same for Avon. After all, in Stringer's mind, he was just putting Avon away for a few years after he tried numerous times to reason with Avon, whereas Avon knew he was okaying his friend's death. The reason I'm mentioning this is because Stringer gets a lot of hate, whereas Avon often gets a pass from fans. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Ultimately, between the two, I do think that what Stringer did was worse, because Avon was essentially forced into it, whereas Stringer had more autonomy in his decision. Muzone wanted Stringer's blood regardless, and he was going to get it with or without Avon's approval. The Greeks, as powerful as they are, the most powerful gangsters in the show, and yet they also snitch. If you remember, the Greek tips off Agent Coutras about the Colombian drug shipment that was hidden in paint pigments, and it's implied it's common for the Greek to tip off Coutras about the shenanigans of his business rivals. In fact, the Greek is thought to be a protected asset, an informant, like Bubbles I guess, but on a way higher level. So perhaps his entire operation and the ease of which he's able to go about things relies on his knowledge of rival groups and terrorist organizations and his willingness to snitch on them. Sticking with the Greeks, and Sergei of course also squeals. He's a stoic character, tough and intimidating, but when he's faced with the chair in the interrogation room for murder, he crumbles and tells the detectives how to find the Greeks. It never leads to anything, and he ends up with life in prison, and we do see him again in season 5 when he gives the connect to Marlowe. We can't really talk about Snitches in The Wire without mentioning D'Angelo. D deserves a few videos of his own, so I'll keep this brief. But he came very close to becoming a full-blown turncoat, and he did of course implicate Weebay in murder, and he told the cops that Weebay was hiding in Philly. But he stopped short of a betrayal of the family after his mother's visit, where she convinced him to take the years. Ultimately, D never testified in court, but during a period where he was confused, disillusioned with the family business and the murder of Wallace, he did give information on Bay. So again, regardless of the fact that he was willing to take all those years, does he count as a snitch? He did agree to flip, then he changed his mind. That alone would have got him taken out if he wasn't Avon's kin. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Ultimately, it did seem that D'Angelo had resigned himself to take the years, but Stringer didn't want to take that chance and had him taken out. From a purely business perspective, you can see where String is coming from. He cracked once, he can crack during his 20 years. But I think the irony here is that after so much talk about D potentially flipping, I genuinely think he would have just quietly seen out his years. What about Frank Sabatka? I'm not hearing his name here, I hear you say. Here's another guy who propagated an us versus them mentality when it came to the cops. He taught his troopers well on taking the fifth and staying silent in court, but when it came to his anger at the Greeks and what they had involved him in, his son's prison sentence included, he wanted to put the Greeks behind bars, and just talking to the cops in a preliminary meeting was enough for him to be killed by the Greeks for it. There's another snitch in the show, easy to miss I think. If you notice, during the season 3 montage after the Barksdales have been arrested, there's a shot of Shamrock, Stringer Bell's middle management, talking to the detectives and pointing at photos, with Bunk making a murmuring sound in disgust. I think it's pretty fair to deduce that he was singing like a canary for a lighter sentence. Some shameless shit. Then of course we have Bubbles, The Wire's quintessential snitch, the lovable Reginald, the heart of The Wire. Bubbles is a dope fiend who rats to Kima for cash, having gone beyond the stage of buying into notions of loyalty to the streets and honour, unlike his young partner Johnny, who takes issue with Bubbles' snitching. And when Johnny is beaten, Bubbles becomes more determined. When you consider that Bodhi got popped for getting a ride from McNulty, it's extraordinary that Bubbles was never caught and nobody, aside from Omar, was aware that he was a CI. Then again, he was pretty smart about it, always riding in the back of Kima's car for example, as if he's a perp who got pinched. He's just a random invisible fiend to the crews. The only extra attention drawn to him is his mobile store and his hat thing, but as no arrests are immediately done after his hat trick, the dealers don't have a reason to suspect him. And none of the info Bubbles ever gave was secret knowledge, inside stuff. He didn't know any of that. All he knew was what the streets knew anyway, so how could anyone trace it back to him? Bubbles usually gives an outline of events or crews. He's never actually a witness to events. It's like he's a tour guide for the cops for the Baltimore streets. He also never testified, so his position as a CI was kept safe. I mean, case in point, the real Bubbles, nicknamed Possum, snitched far more so than the fictional version in the show, and nobody even knows who he was based on, aside from Ed Burns. So I think I'll end it there. There's more that can be said, but this video is getting very long now and I'm kind of exhausted. I haven't eaten in 12 hours. And I also forgot about pimpin' ass Orlando, who went behind Avon and got set up by the cops on his very first deal. Maybe we can also do a video looking at the characters that didn't snitch when they could have, like Weebay or Chris. What do you make of the snitches of The Wire? And do you think there's any I've missed? Let me know in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.